My name is Betsy Lazega, and I am with the Florida PBIS project. Today, you are going to be receiving a presentation from Dr. Devin Minch and Brooke Curtis. So before we get started with our presentation, we just wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up. The first thing is that you're going to see a link here that says access materials. And so that has a tiny URL, and from that URL, you will be able to access any handouts.
Also, we wanted to let you know at that link, it'll take you to the live binder that includes information for the chat we did yesterday. So all of that is in one place for you. The objectives for today. So the brief overview for today will hopefully give you some considerations for adapting your class-wide PBIS practices to fit the needs of your new virtual learning environments, along with considerations for connecting with families and supporting them as they are providing some at-home learning. The 5 PBIS classroom practices that we'll be reviewing today include structure, expectations and routines, active engagement, encouraging positive behaviors, and responding to problem behaviors. As well as we'll provide the link to additional resources around each of those 5 areas that will be developed and made available on our website soon. For those that are familiar with the FLPBIS website and supports from our homepage, flpbis.org, all of our classroom resources can be found by selecting Classroom from the tiers at the top of the page. There's a drop-down menu labeled Tiers, and then you select Classroom. Research shows that implementing the 5 elements of classroom or class-wide PBIS are some of the most important practices for reducing disciplinary outcomes for students. These same principles, maximizing structure and organization, creating your schedule, teaching expectations and rules consistently and effectively, actively engaging students in instruction, interesting and relevant ways to them, and then using responses effectively to both encourage appropriate behaviors and discourage inappropriate behaviors can apply to online as well. So this webinar will follow up with resources that are being developed to help you adapt your classroom strategies and fit your online learning environments. Before we got into kind of the more specifics around how these 5 can look different for online learning, we just wanted to share and acknowledge kind of what the current situation is for everyone. It's a sudden, drastic change, and we've all had very little time to kind of transition. So consider using what's helpful from this presentation. Start small and work your way up. Don't feel like you have to try all of these ideas at once and become even more overwhelmed. Allow time for everyone to adjust, including yourself, your students, families, and then add on or try things out as you're comfortable. Be sure to keep connected with your colleagues and discuss what's working and what's not. A lot of times these ideas can be helpful as we kind of adjust to the new normal. So attention to the first classroom PBIS practice, maximizing structure and organization, can really help during the transition to online learning. Depending on the requirements of your district or school, you might consider shifting from thinking about daily lessons to weekly to allow students a more flexible schedule while learning from home. Getting a clear picture of the objectives, the knowledge and skills that you're focusing on with your students, and then considering how to adapt that to your e-learning environment might reduce the overwhelming feeling when you're reviewing the amount of digital resources that are being shared right now or being made available to you. So sometimes we think about all of these great pieces of software technology at our fingertips and then think, what can we do with it? One idea might be to just think about what is it that you're trying to accomplish? What objectives, knowledge, skills are you hoping to achieve? And then think about what technology would be most helpful to achieve those results. So some questions are listed here for you to think about as you are planning and thinking about approaching lessons and activities in different ways. One idea that's found on the site linked here, Caitlin Tucker. These were just some really helpful considerations that we found. And if in your handout, in the live binder, it's a PDF, and a lot of the images are hyperlinked. So if you click on the picture, it'll take you to the website directly. So some of these ideas were to engage students in a weekly goal setting activity. So that kind of helps them think about and focus their learning. And then these goals can be revisited at the end of the week through individual student conferences and things um, as we continue in the next month or so, maybe longer. Scheduling. So when thinking about your schedule of activities for children, we've listed some considerations for you on this slide. With this new approach, you'll want to consider planning, those non-negotiables first. So anything from the district or school that you're trying to incorporate, as well as time for interacting virtually with your students. So that could be through discussion forums or virtual conferencing. But you'll also want to consider connecting more closely with families and students around the schedule to make sure that you're considering times that work for students and families, as well as not just times that work for them, but when they'll have access to technology to engage with you. These were just some of the examples of the virtual learning schedules that we've come across so far. So when scheduling, you can still consider varying the instructional activities that you're planning with students as well. So things like whole group instruction, small group instruction, and individualized instruction or student conferences. This resource, again, if you click on it, it'll take you to it in your handout, was really helpful in thinking about designing instruction in a virtual environment and gave some very concrete steps that you may want to consider. Additionally, considering scheduling times for virtual connections with families will offer them a network of support, which can be very helpful for them and for you during this time. So if questions or issues or ideas come up, they can begin to share those with each other and kind of extend the options for Q&A and support beyond just the classroom teacher to other families engaging in similar efforts with their children at home. The second classroom PBIS critical element is expectations and rules. So it's going to be important to clarify what's expected from everyone during this time of uncertainty and think about adapting your school-wide expectations for virtual learning, not only for students, but families and staff as well. So this is an example of a high school that posted their virtual learning expectations on their website and clarified some things for students, teachers, and parents. On the right is how you might fit that and align that with your school-wide expectations that you had previous to this experience. Similarly, for classroom teachers, you likely had something on the left before the worldwide pandemic. And now that we're teaching online, you can still incorporate, use, and teach and refer to those classroom expectations, school-wide expectations, but you want to think about how your classroom rules might change and clarify those expected behaviors in ways that are aligned with the expectations, but more consistent with what you're hoping to see in a virtual learning environment. As always, teaching these explicitly, discussing them often with students, and acknowledging when you see them is always important. These are additional resources to assist with your behavior matrices as you adapt PBIS for online learning environments as well. The one on the left is from the Center for PBIS. And the one on the right is just something to think about, if you have a more fluid virtual learning environment, how you can clarify behaviors and expected behaviors for those particular activities like breaks, lunch time, or presentation time. The third class-wide PBIS practice, active engagement of students can also and should be incorporated in the virtual learning environment. Most definitely. So consider ways of continuing your whole group, small group, and individual instruction. And in handouts, we've provided at the initial link that we shared with you, there's a resource list supplemental handout, and it includes many links to software, websites that are free and available to educators right now that can be used in ways to encourage student discussion, collaborative work online, different activities, and ways of engaging students in their learning. Pre-recorded videos or lectures can be provided to students to complete independently prior to something like a video or chat-like discussion or within smaller groups or even whole group. So that's kind of that flipped instruction idea. So you're capitalizing on if you have a group of students together live with their cameras on, that's really a time for them to discuss what they watched or what they learned through that independent activity. Small group activities can occur by creating discussion boards or smaller classroom configurations through Google Classroom or like a Google Docs even. I've seen teachers using those to kind of create a discussion board for students. Nearpod is another one where you can assign students to a certain kind of Padlet. That's another one where they are the only ones that are seeing the discussion that's happening. Zoom also has the option to have breakout rooms, Google Hangout, Microsoft Teams, so you can use these things to create smaller configurations of students for small group activities. Individual instruction and supports can occur through those video conferences as well as ongoing dialogue that we've used before. So things like phone and your typical email. So some students may not have access to a computer or a device throughout the full day. And so when you're scheduling those virtual conferences or video conferences, you want to make sure you're scheduling it at a time where they do have access to a device with a camera, if that's your expectation. Some ideas that we came across for whole group instruction that I thought was really interesting were things like virtual field trips. So there's a link, if you click on the word these in your PowerPoint handout, it'll take you to some ideas for whole group instruction that kind of keep kids offline for a little bit. So whether that's kind of offline. So some of these things can be downloaded and watched if internet is a concern. PBS has a lot of resources like that, as well as exploring things like virtual museums or places a lot of folks are posting how you can do virtual field trips. Things that you're going to want to consider using strategies where students can be independent. And so there's not so much required adult support or involvement in the lesson because not all children, some of you may know you might be homeschooling your children and trying to provide educational supports to students through virtual learning environments. And so managing all of that can be a lot. So the more that we can think about activities, lessons, and things for students to do where they'll be successful as they work independently is really important. The CaitlinTucker.com had a nice approach and resources and considerations for you to think about as you are structuring up your small group activities. So things like hooking the group, using that gradual release approach, and all of these ideas are adapted for online learning environments. So how these things might look different for you as we transition to this new way of teaching. Can you hear me? Sorry, I think I was muted for a minute. Individual video conferencing, you're going to want to think about the logistics with scheduling these, as well as clarifying your purpose for them ahead of time. So what do you hope to achieve with that time with students? Making sure you're conducting something like that individual goal setting or providing direct instruction. But the logistics can be overwhelming. So thinking about considering availability. Are you going to schedule individual, require all students to schedule with you one-on-one? Or are you going to offer kind of like a virtual office hours where students can join a Zoom or join some kind of platform to engage with you? This would also allow more than one student to join at a time. Um, the technology. So going back to, do students have access to the devices they need to engage with you at all times? And if not, consider how you might take that information from them ahead of time and schedule according to what works best for them and their family as well. All right, I'm going to pass it off to Brooke to talk about acknowledging appropriate behavior.
Thank you, Devin. Hi, everyone. My name's Brooke Curtis. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our fourth essential, which is adapting and acknowledging appropriate behaviors of our students in the e-learning classroom setting. You'll likely face some of the same challenges that you would encounter in the classroom on a daily basis. Not every student will want to learn. They may be easily distracted, engage in other activities unrelated to their lesson or distracting others, or simply just refuse to join in. But there's a big difference between how you can prevent these behaviors from happening in the classroom versus virtually. In the classroom, you're used to being able to physically remove distractions, move students around, use proximity control to help encourage your students to return their attention back to the class or lesson. While you may be able to respond to some of these inappropriate behaviors in the traditional sense, which we are going to get to shortly, you'll likely need to increase the use of acknowledging appropriate behaviors with the positive feedback. During distance learning and online creating instruction, you have these unique opportunities to maintain that positive student relationship, which is essential to help with the positive school climate and culture. At the class level, within your lessons, you want to make sure you're providing consistent, frequent, and positive feedback on your expectations you're seeing with your students and engaging with them to help them further enhance their student-teacher relationship. We also have unique opportunities to provide feedback that will help teach our students new ways of engaging in learning and building lifelong learning skills such as resiliency and problem solving. Here are just a few basic strategies that require a little adaptation to use within the virtual or distance learning platform. However, the frequency of feedback is likely to be far less than what you're able to provide and as readily and easily as you're used to within your classroom environment. We often see teachers providing specific praise at high rates in the classroom across a variety of peers. So while you may not provide specific praise to an individual student, that child is still able to observe the feedback that you're giving to others and learn from their peers as a model. During live conferences, this may or may not be possible depending on your platform. You know, can all your students see each other while they're working, or is just the teacher able to see the students? So taking all these things into consideration when planning for that positive feedback, so you can work towards your students receiving that positive feedback at a ratio of 5 to 1. You want to maybe consider and plan for having maybe 2 to 3 daily positive feedback posts, either through private messaging with your students or on their assignments, so that you can make sure each child is getting that positive feedback and it becomes part of your routine as a teacher. During a live conference, it can be overwhelming to manage the video feed and comment log that your students are engaging in while also presenting content. So it may be easiest to start each lesson session with specific public praise after you reviewed your expectations. For example, you could do things like, I was able to log in and see that everyone got their assignment completed and submitted on time. Way to be responsible, guys. Or maybe even giving specific praise to an individual student, such as, after yesterday's session, I noticed Macy helping out some of you who are having trouble finding our class notes in the chat box. Thank you for being kind and responsible, Macy. While that strategy itself is easy to use, the challenge will be ensuring that you're purposeful in planning for its use and to make sure that it's at that needed frequency to increase those behaviors. Another strategy that you may commonly have used in your classroom is the first then or grandma's rule. Students could first complete their independent work, then use the extra time for a preferred activity or activity of their choosing. This might be a great opportunity if you have parents asking for help on how to get their child more motivated to complete tasks, that you can help support them by sharing with them some of those rewards and reinforcers that you've used in your classroom to help set up that contingency. You can push out known preferred tasks with that contingency in place. First, complete the independent practice through your e-textbook and then go to your Brain Pop videos. You really have to get creative in looking into your learning platform to see if it can even allow to change the settings. I know at one point iReady would allow you to have the students access the games and tokens and things like that after set criteria that could be managed by the teacher. As with any reinforcement system, you want to ensure you have access for all of your student groups. If you focus your acknowledging of appropriate behaviors only during those live sessions, you're likely going to miss some of your student population. Some of our at-risk students are likely going to be some of our hardest to reach. So planning for them not only in content of lessons, but in how to connect them and acknowledge those behaviors will be equally important. And last but not least, don't forget your parents. Those are our key stakeholders. They need some reinforcement right now too. Trust me, I'm a parent as well. And we need that behavior specific praise too, to know that we're doing right by our children as well. Go ahead, Devin. Some additional strategies that aren't as readily available and do require some creativity include things like the use of reinforcement menus. Some things like your lunch bunch may still be possible. You just may have to get a little bit creative in how to set it up. And again, ensure access to that reinforcer will be key to, is it motivating? Otherwise, they're just not going to be motivated by it. Now, we also are in a very unique time and a really neat time to have brainstorming sessions with your class on ideas of things that they would like to see or do in their virtual learning environment. Do they want to share videos they've made of learning how to play drums or a creative writing assignment? Do you have opportunities to do show and tell and link it to, you know, a standard for them? Is there silly hat days or those crazy hair days? I've seen lots of things in building that school climate and culture with school spirit weeks, but is there a way that maybe you can tie that into a reinforcement menu and group contingency, which we'll talk about in just a second. Now is a good time to also reach out to your parents for ideas and share with them also rewards you have used, successfully in your classroom. Because again, I promise as a parent, we're running out of ideas too. Now, some of our PBIS schools may have had token reward systems. While that is fast and efficient, you likely can't physically hand out your Bronco Bucks anymore or the punch cards like you've done in the past. However, if you have been able to maintain some sort of point system or virtual bucks, you want to make sure that that criteria for earning is still consistent, it's linked to the expectation, and that it's bridged to a long-term reward, and really avoid linking it back to anything that you aren't sure you'll be able to provide, especially in these uncertain times, to say when you get back to school, you'll be able to get prom tickets or mystery events, things like that. We want to make sure that we're aware of, because otherwise that token is losing its value because it's to a reward that's not available anymore. And again, considering how do we connect to those kids who aren't live, they're not engaging in the face-to-face interactions, but they still are maybe engaging in distance learning through learning packets. You know, is there a way that they too can access these same reinforcements? Next. Without the ability of the token economies, we may end up relying a lot more on some of strategies such as written or public recognition, those positive referrals to our parents, positive phone calls home, surprise events, you know, greeting your students at a live session with something silly or a fun activity that they weren't expecting. But again, like I had mentioned before, once you've brainstormed some ideas with your students and you have a list of things that you're able and willing to do in order to reward and reinforce them for their engagement, you can use different group contingencies, like an all-for-one strategy where everyone gets all their assignments posted in the virtual classroom on time, and we can spend the first 5 minutes of class session telling jokes or something like that. And again, linking it back to that expectation of being responsible. Nope, you're good. One other thing to consider is, again, those students who don't have access, you can always link some of the reinforcement. You know, if they are having to come in and pick up packets and turn in work, can they have coupons or gift certificates available for as they complete work when they turn it in? Okay, now we know that prevention works best. That's why we focus a lot of our chat today on those elements, but we also know that problem behaviors are going to occur, and having a consistent plan that has a continuum of responding makes it easier for you to follow through. Problem behaviors do not necessarily necessitate a disciplinary action, but they should be addressed as soon as you notice them. Next. Thank you. So first, when planning for your online instruction, you're going to want to start thinking about and need to know what behaviors you're going to respond to. What are those potential problem behaviors that you're likely to encounter? You won't likely be able to predict all those problems, but the more problems you can anticipate for and plan ahead of time will help you manage them. Much like our issue that we had yesterday with some of our chat. We were not anticipating those problems, but now that we're prepared for them, we're better able to respond to them. Will problem behaviors in this virtual classroom, such as not using your mute properly, chatting in the comment box, those things that are minor but interfere with the live instruction, if that's a problem for you as a teacher, you need to figure out a plan for addressing that ahead of time. Again, through either teacher controls, if it's something that your platform doesn't allow for, what are some cues and prompts you can put into your instruction in order to account for that? As behaviors are more significant, you'll have to discuss with your colleagues, with your school administrators, with teams on how to make those adjustments as well. Next.
I'm trying, sorry.
That's all right.
Oh.
All right, perfect. Traditionally, as a PBIS school, you may be used to handling behaviors that have been determined to be teacher managed versus those that are office managed. If directives haven't yet been given out to you regarding this, it's best to focus on those behaviors that are interrupting with the virtual learning environment and focus your problem solving around those first. If you haven't already, make sure you know how your school or districts are managing more significant behaviors that may be linked to code of conduct, such as tech violations, inappropriate posting of gestures or comments that may be considered significant. And have those already been defined by your school teams? And if so, what is the process that you're to be following? Similarly, some problem behaviors that impact engagement would not be appropriate to address as a disciplinary action and would be best to work through with maybe your student support team, your colleagues, administrators to problem solve and address support for lack of engagement due to things like lack of access. Like Devin mentioned, some of our at-risk students won't be able to engage in the live instruction the way that we are anticipating. So how can we problem solve around that? You know, how is your school or district planning and supporting if they haven't already done so? So knowing that these students or these subgroups may display behaviors that need to be responded to, but do not require disciplinary actions, and knowing how your team's addressing ahead of time so you can link them to the correct supports will help to not only reduce problem behavior, but also to reinforce this and support that student-teacher relationship. Go ahead. I think there's a few fly-ins there, Devin.
No problem. Sorry, my computer is having a day again. Okay.
All right. So once you've taught and reinforced your expected behaviors, if your students are displaying problem behaviors online or within the chat forums, you'll want to address those problem behaviors with a calm and neutral tone that lets the student know what the problem behavior was, what they should be doing, give them an opportunity to practice that expectation. And when you see the expected behavior, provide it with the positive feedback. And there's just an example there for you to kind of follow along with the dialogue. If you see a student not participating in the discussions, even though you see that they're logged in, remember, you can state, I expect you to ask questions, comment back to your peers so I know you're an active learner, and then prompt and provide them that opportunity for practice with, I'd like to see you contribute to tomorrow's discussion with feedback the next day. And lastly, next. There we go. Many of our strategies that we use are easy to adapt and adjust to our online supports, but others take more planning and coordination. So again, like I mentioned, we can maybe pre-correct and prompt some for problem behaviors by reviewing expectations at the start of each lesson. We can create our own or orient your students to the prompts built into the online platform that lets them know when they can ask questions versus when you'll be talking. You know, what's that visual cue that is within your platform that lets them know, hey, you're muted right now. And now I'm going to open up the dialogue box so that students can respond back. You might also have to engage in those error correction procedures like described before. Instructional changes, kind of what Devin was talking to with regard to that active engagement. If you're seeing, you know, low responses, low engagement, how can I change this virtual instruction to get that higher level of student-led and more opportunities for responding? Yep. And this is 3 clicks, Devin, please. This is just the idea that we need to have that continuum of responding. And this should also be in your handout so you get a full description of what the type of response to the inappropriate behavior is and how to use it or what it looks like. So again, while we may start traditionally with things like eye contact or proximity control, and that may not be as easily and readily available to you during that virtual instruction, we can increase that frequency of behavior-specific praise. We can also look at our instruction and make changes to the activities in order to decrease those problem behaviors and how we respond. And as behaviors get more intense and need more intervention, we can, you know, refer to support as needed or discuss things through the use of things like a behavioral contract. Next.
Trying.
Excuse me. The idea that things, that business as usual, those of you who have been through our PBIS training, you've probably been trained and looked at the discipline flow chart, the idea of teacher managed versus office or minor versus major behaviors. The idea that business as usual, it's not really necessarily possible in terms of how we handle and traditionally manage problem behaviors, but this is where that collaboration and discussion with your administrative teams, your PBIS teams, to really start to look at this discipline flow chart and say where in here does our virtual instruction fit into place, make adjustments accordingly. And that'll be part of as we go into some of these deeper dives and we hear, you know, get more guidance too and see what more district policies are coming out regarding this, give you some more information to make those adjustments as needed as well.
All right. These are just a few resources that we included here to give you guys some places to go. I'm sure your districts and schools are providing you lots of resources and information on this as well, but these were some helpful resources we found. These are short, small infographics that can be used for yourselves, for discussing with colleagues, partnering with your service providers on how to support students with disabilities through virtual learning and what all of these changes mean for our roles and for students receiving their services. So these are from FND, which is Family Network on Disabilities, and they have some really great things. If you hover on the images, it'll take you directly. These are webinars that are a little bit more in depth and can give you some more helpful information and ideas, as well as clarifying some questions that you might have on how to support students with disabilities during this time. Yesterday, we provided a brief webinar on how families can use the 5 essentials. We were referring to them as 5 essentials yesterday. How they can use these same concepts at home to kind of help throughout the day and support a more positive family life during COVID and homeschooling and working from home. So the image here is also in that live binder. The recording is up. So think about sharing that with your families, as well as considering how you're giving them some support around these domains as we move forward. Here are links to additional resources. From our homepage, we are adding an online learning tab at the top, where we will be posting additional, more in-depth recorded webinars around each of the 5 domains here. So this was just intended to be a quick, brief overview of give you some starters, but we will be following up with more in-depth resources and information soon. Betsy, let me see. I think I'll do one more slide here. So this is all of our contact information. Additionally, links to the National Center on PBIS. It has that's been putting out a lot of great resources on specific to COVID. And be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and access our YouTube channel. That's where we will post all of the new things that we are developing. Before we go, I think Betsy is going to share with you an example of a school that has moved to using a virtual environment to support discussing and teaching their expectations.
Yeah, thank you guys. That was so awesome. I just wanted to share and a little shout out if they're on the call. Vero Beach Elementary has put some really cool things on social media. There is a really cute video of the principal doing a TikTok with some of the expectations. They also have this one, which was their morning announcements, but you can find them on Twitter or on YouTube, and I can just maybe show you a brief few seconds of this one. I'm not sure if the sound will come through. Let's see.
Please stand for the pledge. Please remain standing for the Kids at Home pledge.
Well, so you get the idea. I think they're playing some of their morning announcements on their virtual videos, trying to kind of keep the pattern the same for kids and using that technology, but also trying to capture some of that school environment that the kids are still, you know, comfortable with and miss and would like to get back to. So it kind of gives that little bit of comfort and familiarity to the whole virtual environment. And of course, you can go to our Twitter and our Facebook page and find lots of examples. And please feel free to share some of your examples with us that we can post on social media, so we can all learn from each other. I just wanted to also do the polls. I'm going to have Devin pull them up. If you're ready, Devin, did you have any other content to share?
No, I didn't have any other contact information to share. I know there was a request to put this slide back up, so we did. That VBE video is posted on our Twitter account, and so if you scroll past the kind of intro announcements, there you will see a principal speaking to the school through YouTube for the daily discussion on their school-wide expectations. So that can give you an idea of how you might continue those conversations and support your expectations and teaching those, even though you're not in a school building.
Yes, such a
So
cool idea. And thank you
okay,
guys.
to share. Shout out to Therese who made that, and it is extremely awesome. So I will go back here so you guys can see in our chat finder. This is where you can find that video. Anything else, Betsy?
I just wanted to close as I see some people are finishing up. We've had a couple questions about specific to high school versus elementary. We'll also be providing some webinars that you'll be able to, they'll be pre-recorded of each of the 5 essentials where they'll be broken down a little bit better. We're taking all of your feedback to those that are creating that content, and we'll make sure that they address how to differentiate from primary to secondary, as well as I believe, those that may be in districts where online lessons and platforms are not available to you, how you can adapt those to the distance learning there as well.
I think that we're good. Thank you guys so much.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, feel free to email us or reach out to us on social media if you have any other questions or comments.